Hello and welcome to Blueprint. I'm John Hubbard. I was teaching LDR 551, Building and Leading Security Operations Centers in Nashville recently with the guest on this episode, whose name is Zak Stufflebeam. And instead of our normal online interview, we tried something new. The hotel was right next to a place called Centennial Park in Nashville, which has a really cool replica of the Parthenon in Greece. Every time I'm in Nashville, I love going there and just going for a run or walking around because the place has great energy and it always gets the ideas flowing. So I thought, well, since Zak is there with me in person, we could probably just throw on some wireless mics and walk around the park and have a discussion and record it that way. So what we've got today is a walk and talk style format. And while the audio sounds good, you'll also catch some of the live ambiance in the park that we were in. So I tried to noise reduce it, but hopefully that's not distracting for you. In this interview, I asked Zak some more deep and personal questions than I normally do with guests. And the reason for that is that he's got a really interesting leadership background. You'll hear the details in the beginning of this episode. And while you listen to him, I want you to pay attention and see if you can pick up any themes with regards to how he was so successful in his leadership positions and what was the thing that kept him going, finding that success over and over and over. I'm curious if the listeners also pick up on the same thing I did. I'll mention my take on this at the end of the podcast, but something to pay attention to as you hear the start of this story. This was a really interesting conversation that left me with a lot of thoughts on leadership and building team culture, and I think it will for you too. One very exciting thing, though, before we get started, I have a huge announcement. I just dropped the biggest ever update to SEC 450. It is an absolutely enormous update where we even changed the course name to reflect the change. It is now called SEC 450 SOC Analyst Training Applied Skills for Cyber Defense Operations, and I changed it to best reflect who and what the course is for as it has continued to evolve over the years. I hope you'll check it out. What we added here was hundreds of new slides, new labs, tons of new tools, and more to make sure it matches today's capabilities and challenges. This update has new modules and labs with hands-on skills with Yara X, Sigma, and practical ways to bring generative AI into your SOC. We also have automation with tools like N8N, new modules on phishing prevention and detection, labs and modules on malware reversing and detection engineering way beyond what we had before. It's a really, really exciting set of new material. We're now also up to 22 hands-on labs. Yes, 22. So you're not just going to sit through a bunch of slides. We're going to get you hands-on over and over again throughout this course and get you practicing with the skills you need to do the job. If you're looking for the perfect way to level up SOC analyst skills and be ready for real threats we face today, check out the brand new SEC 450 SOC Analyst Training Applied Skills for Cyber Defense Operations at sands.org/SEC 450. Registration is open now, and the release for the new material for On Demand will be out in just a few more days, so don't miss it. Okay, let's dive into the episode.
I'm Zak Stufflebeam. I'm a director of cybersecurity at a publicly traded insurance company.
You got a unique background with leadership, right?
Yeah.
And a little bit of a story there and a history that led you into security operations. Can we hear a little bit about where you came from?
Yeah, so I'll kind of go all the way back and mainly just to showcase the leadership portion of it. But so I actually joined the military very young, and when I joined, I really didn't have aspirations necessarily to be a leader. I went on the enlisted side, and when I did that, I went to basic training. When I got to basic training, I was 19, I think, and so when I went to basic training, they usually, if you're older than everybody else, they put you in a leadership position. And fortunately for me, or unfortunately, depending on who you talk to, I was older than most of the kids. So I was put as what they call an element leader in the Air Force training. And so what that really looks like is I was in charge of, I want to say about 20 people, something like that. And so you're in charge of making sure, you know, that they get dressed at the right time, they have their uniform pressed, all that stuff. So if they fail, you're the one getting in trouble over and over. And so doing that was my first kind of dose of leadership because I was in a unique position. When I grew up, I didn't have a great childhood. And so growing up and then joining the military was kind of one of those things for me. I took it very seriously. I took it as this is a career for me and not necessarily like a lot of 18-year-old kids who are like, I just want college paid for or whatever. So I learned pretty quickly that you got to kind of wrangle these kids in. And so that was my first dose of leadership. And I graduated with honors from basic, which is, I don't know the exact percentage, but I think it's 10% of graduates get it. So it's the top 10%. And so then I went to tech school. And when I got to tech school, I was actually top of my class in tech school as well. And so I was kind of running leadership on that side because I was older as well. But the tech school leadership really isn't the same. There wasn't much to it. And then as soon as I got home, it was only about maybe 6 to 8 months from there, I got deployed to the Middle East. And as soon as I did, that's when I started leading teams in like really intense situations. That's when, there was times where things were like, this needs done now, and it's not a joke anymore. And so it was that type of leadership where you make or break, I guess, if you will.
Like a lives are on the line kind of situation.
Yeah, it was kind of like, this is going to happen, or we're going to find someone that can make it happen. So you kind of just go with that route. And so that's when I learned how to like really remain calm under pressure, which at the time wasn't necessarily a goal of mine, but it was something I learned that then translated really well into a SOC later, because that's actually one of the reasons, and we'll talk about it, but one of the reasons why I'm in the position I'm in now as quickly as I was is because that's one of my main attributes. Is during a crisis, I'm calm and can think clearly and do those types of things that you need to do during an incident. And so when I got back from the deployment, I was trying to figure out, I had a full-time job, a career, and I loved it, but I took a tour with DISA, which owns all the networks for the DoD, and I actually ran the team there too. And my job was to just travel the country and troubleshoot IT issues and things like that. Okay. And then so once we traveled the country, then we started traveling internationally, and we just went base to base to base. And that's when I kind of ran into the Secret Service. It was, before pen testing was like really well known. And so I actually, this goes way back, but I actually in high school got suspended for hacking into a computer. and it wasn't even like hacking, it was just they had remote administration tool sitting there with no password. And back then nobody knew what security was, so you just so I was always interested in it. But when I met with the Secret Service guys, we were working, and we just we weren't even working with them. We were just always around them because we were working in the same vicinity. And every time I'd be like, I knew the guy was a pen tester, and I would just be bothering him all the time. I just kept saying, hey, how do you do that? Show me how you do that. And it finally got to a point where he was like, all right, come here, I'll show you some of the stuff so you'll leave me alone. And then that just made it worse, because then the next day I'm like, all right, now you got to show me this. And so then we'd have contractors from different vendors like Dell, HP, stuff like that, and that would have to fly out in data centers to troubleshoot any major issues. And this is because the data centers have like, they're rented out, so it's not all classified, but they have classified data, so there's no way to like Google anything in there. There's no way to. So that was where we really started to like learn if you're good or not, because if you have to keep going to check out to go get your information, you're really gonna struggle, because you have to go through what they call a man trap and get checked in and all this stuff. So I started working with those HP vendors and the Dell vendors, because we'd always call them out, and I just would say, hey, show me how you're doing this. And I said, once you show me how you do that, I would take diligent notes. And then they realized quickly, like, we don't have to call these guys anymore. So now when we're flying overseas, I'm saving us a lot of money, because I'm just troubleshooting this stuff.
Right. And
so that's how I kind of started to run that team. And then they basically asked me to do another tour. I said, no, thank you. This is when I first got my my CEH, which was actually one of my first certs. And I got that because DISA paid for it. And so I started just going full bore into the offensive side, because I really enjoyed it. And then I took a full-time position in an intelligence unit doing basically, it started as like defensive security, but it was on a classified network. So there wasn't a ton of, I'll say, defensive tasks. It wasn't like I was really doing a whole lot of it from a defensive security perspective. And so I worked there, and while I was working there, I basically took over. We had a system, and then we had a mock system. And the mock system was like our training system, so that we could actually do things that you can't do on a production system.
Right.
And so I started very quickly, like just offensive hacking as much as I can, and like asking to do pen tests on the system and do all this stuff. And so then this is sort of a made up title, but it made me happy at the time. They made me the offensive security specialist for the unit. And then This was when the state department was actually building up cyber infrastructure for National Guard and these type of entities. And so I actually stood up the first, I designed and stood up the first offensive cyber lab for the state, me and a group of people, but I helped lead that effort. That was where I kind of like started thinking outside the box for leadership.
Yeah.
It was like, we kept getting, you're not gonna get funding for this, you're not gonna get funding for this. So we started like calling the Army and like, do you have leftover servers? Do you have like stuff that you don't use? And
Smart.
they'd be like, yeah, we have a ton. Like they're just sitting over here. So we were like, can we grab them? So like we went over there and we just grabbed their stuff. And then like we asked, what's this server? It's a bright red one. And they were like, that's our Cobalt Strike server. And we're like, do you guys use that? Because there's no offensive anything in the state. And they're like, no, someone ordered it like 3 years ago. And so I'm like, can we have that? And so we had a whole plethora of stuff, and we designed it, stood it up, and made it available for not just Army, but Air Force as well. And so that was when I was kind of starting to get recognized by my leadership in the military for being a leader. And so then they kind of approached me. One of my officers that was in charge of me approached me and asked if I wanted to be an officer. And you have to have a degree in the military to be an officer, which I had, but you have to go take a test, and it's called the Air Force Officer Qualifying Test. And so I went and took it, passed it, and it wasn't like for 2 more years that an actual opening opened up for it. So I ended up taking that. About 2 years before I applied to that position, I transitioned. I said, I don't want to be full-time active duty anymore. So I said, I'm going to go to the civilian side. Went to the private sector. Then I had some offers for the state because I helped stand up their SOC capabilities. Worked with the state a little bit, doing some like major events like election support, stuff like that. And then I went and worked in the public sector. And when I started working, I was actually hired as a engineer, so a security engineer. I was an engineer / analyst, and this was a really, really fun position, but I learned very quickly that this SOC was extremely immature. They pretty much had one guy doing everything, and then he was also the manager, so he was kind of like...
Literally a one-man band.
And they had other people, but they were just kind of sitting around. And so... So I went from analyst to engineer there, and then when he left, they said, do you want to be the manager? And I said, absolutely not. And my boss, who's the CISO at the time, said, well, how come? And I pointed it out pretty clearly. There's a reason he left. It's because he's doing 15 jobs here, And so he actually kind of sat down with me and said, how would you break this down? How would you operate this? So I sat down with him and we broke it down, and I said, we're going to need to separate these functions and do all this stuff. And they said, absolutely, no problem. And I thought that seemed a little too easy.
Nice.
But they did. And so they promoted me to manager. I was running that SOC. At this point, I was promoted in the National Guard as well to an officer. And I was also transitioned in the National Guard to not only lead a team, but then also lead the cyber response team for my unit as well. So now that cyber lab and all those different major events that we had responded to, I was kind of leading those things as well. And so I was becoming a leader in all aspects, which sounds awesome to a lot of people, but I really kind of ran through this struggle because I wanted to jump in. I wanted to do stuff. And so I learned a couple of hard lessons there, as I'm sure most people do. But then when I became manager, I learned really quickly that leadership in the military is very different than leadership on the civilian side. You can't run a SOC the same way you do in the military. Unfortunately, it's hard to admit, but I probably lost some people that I didn't need to in the SOC as far as analysts. I probably had people leave mainly because, in my opinion, my mistakes. There were communication breakdowns and things like that. And I was very much of the mindset of hop on board or get out. And that's just not realistic in the civilian side. I really had to kind of do some soul searching, sit with myself, and quote Jocko Willink and say extreme ownership. But that was before that book even was written, but I really do believe like you gotta be able to look at yourself that way and say, yeah, I'm making mistakes. It's not, they might have communication issues, but it's my job to figure that out. It's not their job to figure out how to communicate to me effectively.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of like a big eye-opening experience for me, was because I feel like it's kind of like any habit. Once I started doing that, I started doing it more. I started like identifying more issues, and so and I still do that today. I still try to sit with myself and say, where did I make a mistake? Where can I clean it up? You're not gonna necessarily keep everybody, and I understand that as well. But at the end of the day, it's, as a leader, it's my job to make that environment somewhere someone wants to work, and also make that environment somewhere that's secure. But the big thing for me was realizing that people are a much more valuable resource than tools and procedures, because you can train someone, but you can train anyone on any tool really if you give them enough time.
Right.
But you go through people and that historical knowledge, that that repeatability of this person's done this incident 15 times, they can do it quickly, they can do it efficiently. You have a good team morale, you have all those things that really make a team cohesive. And one of the big things I started to really realize is, it's funny, it kind of goes full circle. I started with the military, and then I tried to bring that into the civilian side and realized that's not really how it works. And then I realized later, as I increased morale in a different way, that came back. So like the military feeling that I was looking for actually returned on the civilian side, which sounds counterintuitive, but I run them completely separately, like differently. But they both have the same feeling, where our team wants to be there, they want to hang out, they want to help each other, they don't want to. You start getting people that don't want to call in sick, not because they're not sick or whatever, it's because they're worried they're gonna let someone down.
Right.
And that's not necessarily the best thing in the world. If you're like sick, don't come in, right? But at the end of the day, it's just having that morale, and that really kind of showed me that you can get best of both worlds, if that makes sense.
Right. Having that kind of camaraderie is a good thing,
Yeah.
right? Even if it, you got to encourage people to take their days off when they need them. But
exactly.
like, the fact that desire is there shows you got a team that's bonded well and wants to support each other, right?
Yeah, and that was what really started to change my perspective a little bit on leadership as well. Is as I went through it, I started to learn that the people are really the value, which, you hear that all the time, but it's like, you can say that and say that and say that, but most companies don't prioritize that, regardless of if they say they do.
Yeah.
And so that was where I started to see, like, you've heard obviously probably the quote of like, people don't leave jobs, they leave managers.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So that's kind of one of those things where I've started to really look at everybody as individuals, and that took me time, because I was used to the military where, well, everyone's an individual, you're all going to do what we say.
Right.
And so transitioning that to starting to look at everybody as an individual and saying, this person may need treat a little different. This person may need talked to differently, may need, more one-on-one. I even actually had one analyst years ago come to me and say, I like the way you lead, but I'm actually the type of person that needs someone to tell me, like, do this, do that, do that. And I was like, okay, so you kind of, for lack of a better term, want micromanagement. You want someone to kind of be like,
the guiding hand of sorts.
And he told me, that's how I operate. So like, he had a totally different week-to-week schedule than everybody else. I would sit with him, be like, here's your tasks, break them down, like individual level, all that stuff.
Yep.
And then the other people, I'm like, you've been here for 5-10 years, you know what you're doing, do it,
Right.
And so I started to realize you can really shift your leadership style to an individual. And when I started to see that, I started to kind of open my eyes more to how you can keep people happy, but also when you keep them happy, you start getting more productivity, and you start seeing a lot of that stuff correlate. And so for me, I find it like a puzzle to figure out what makes that person enjoy what they're doing.
Yeah, that makes sense. As a good leader, I think you want someone who is interested and invested in making the team a place that every individual wants to be on, right? And that's going to be a little different for every person. But if you're willing to customize, right, how your management style is with people, and you're interested in figuring that out, right, and bringing that to them, that's the kind of thing that I don't know that every leader would do, right? And definitely I think is a benefit. One thing I'm wondering is, like, a lot of people don't have military experience, and that's a world that a lot of us will probably never see into. Are there any lessons that, I know you said like that may have driven some mistakes as well, but like, is there anything that you think is part of your military training that you think was a clear translation from the general kind of non-tech, non-security work you were doing before that shifted well into a mindset in the SOC?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because I get that question, not in that exact format, but that question a handful of times. And the biggest thing I think that the military teaches, and one of the reasons I believe that, you know, I don't believe that everybody should serve in the military. I don't think it's for everybody, but I do think it provides something that you'll never get anywhere else. And I think one of the big ones is confidence. And the reason that's so important, especially in leadership, is if you have a leader that's gonna make a decision and you can tell they don't know if that's the right decision, you're probably not too sure if you're even following the right path. And that's when you start questioning and not sure what to do, and you start panicking a little bit. And I think in a SOC, even making the wrong decision, but if you all do it together, you're gonna be in a better place than if you make the right decision, but nobody really trusts you. So they're all sitting there waiting, like, should I do that? Should I not?
Right.
So I tell my guys this a lot, and pretty much every SOC and military I've worked with, I tell them the same thing. And that's pretty much that you guys trust that I will have your back. And if they do, I tell them, like, if we have a playbook and you follow that playbook and it's wrong, that's on me. I will take the heat for that all day long. If you followed what I asked you to do, or the expectation I laid out for you, and the C-suite comes to me and says, hey, this guy's doing it all wrong, I 100% will tell them that's on me. I have your back 100%. And I've had those conversations where someone said, hey, so-and-so did something, right? Mm-hmm. And I'll say, yeah, I told them to, and that's on me, right? So right. I think that the more you can show that you have your team's back, I think that's something that the military kind of shows that brotherhood a little bit. And that's usually, you'll hear almost every military member talk about, they don't stay in for the military, they stay in for their brothers and things like that. And right. I think that's something that isn't necessarily translated all the time to the civilian world, especially in the corporate world. And I say that because you see a lot of people, as you get higher and higher and higher in the corporate world, that really are trying to just get to the next level. And so they're kissing butt, they're doing whatever they need to do. They're trying to appease the person above them or the people around them, or especially when you start getting like board level where you're getting elected positions, and right. They're playing that political game. And I think that's really important. But I also think it's important that the people below you, your constituents, don't believe that you're gonna throw them under the bus just to get ahead, because that's when they start watching what they're doing and stuff like that. And I think we've talked about how there's a difference between a manager and a leader, and I truly believe that. And I think when you're responding to an incident, you have to go in leading, right? One of the examples that I've heard you use in the past, I think is awesome, is the firefighter example. And I think that's awesome because exactly what you said, if those firefighters showed up and said, hey, where's the fire hydrant? What do these hoses do, right? You're gonna be like, I gotta get out of here, right? I'm not staying near this house. But they don't. And they don't do that because they train, they practice, right? They have that confidence. I bet even the new guy on that fire department has that confidence because he's around people that all have that confidence. Right. And so I think if your leader has that confidence and trusts in their decisions, and even if they make the wrong decision, because you're gonna make mistakes, it's just a reality. Even if you make the wrong decision, make a decision and stick with it. It's okay to say I'm wrong, or, it's okay to make a mistake, but that's something I see a lot, is I see people hesitate, or they'll say, I'm gonna make this decision, but I'm not really sure it's the right one. Or I've even heard like some executives say things like, hey guys, we're going to do this. And you'll be like, well, how come? And they'll be like, leadership, we got to do what they say,
Right.
And when you start seeing that, the people below you don't believe in what you're doing either.
Right,
so
right.
it's like,
that's true.
For me, that's something that the military really provides, because if you find any good military leader, you're going to see someone that comes in, controls the room, controls what the narrative of what's going on. And one thing the military really preaches, and I think is really good, is you never complain down, right? You're never complaining to the person below you about the person above you. It's one thing to go to the person above you and say, man, these guys are killing me, but you never complain down, because you never want those people below you to see that.
Right.
And so I think that's one of the big lessons that I got from the military, from leading, that actually really transitioned to the civilian side, because pretty much everyone I've worked with or has worked for me has kind of said that. Like they know that I'm going to have their back. They trust that when I make a decision, I'm going to stand there. And, and I say it to a fault, to the point of, if I make a decision and it ends up costing us, and someone comes here and says, hey, you're going to be fired, well, I'm going to still take that heat. Like, it's my job. It's what I'm here for.
Right.
And so I think that's something that some people say that, but it's one thing to say and it's another to actually mean it. And I think that's what's really important.
Yeah, that's the weight of leadership, right? It's like you're going to have to make some tough decisions, and it's your head you're putting on the line, right? Some people might be thinking like, and I know I was like this for sure as a new manager, if you're faced with tough decisions and you have not made those kinds of decisions before, how do you build the kind of confidence that you're talking about here with being able to make those decisions when you're brand new to that environment and doing those kind of things?
Yeah. So this comes from a handful of places, and I don't want to sound almost preachy in a sense, but for one, my childhood, like I said, was tough. So for me, I didn't have any money or anything like that. And so the big thing for me was like, I was never afraid to fail, because where was I going to go? I mean, I'm going to go to the same place I was, so it's not going to hurt me. I know I can make it. So for me, that was a big one, is like, I was never afraid. The other thing, and Matthew McConaughey actually said this, but he says, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said the thing that keeps him up at night is if he ever does something and he goes halfway in and doesn't do it fully. And so I'm that way too. I can live with myself if I go into something, make these decisions, and they're not right, and that's on me. But I had conviction and trust in myself to do that. I couldn't live with myself if I made decisions based on something that I didn't believe or something I didn't trust, and then someone came and said, hey, we're going to, let you go because of these decisions, because I trust my intuition, my instinct. It comes from, a big part of it comes from something that the military breathes into you, which is consistent success. And so that continues from like little successes. Like if you go talk to some of the most successful people in the world, they'll tell you, like, get up and make your bed in the morning. It's such a silly little thing, but like, that's a win for the day.
Yeah.
So success is just winning over and over, and you stack those little wins and they become big wins, right? And then one of the things I think that kind of helps me with my confidence in some aspects as well is the fact that, like, what people don't see is all the time, the effort, and all that stuff that I'm doing in the back end that they're not watching behind the scenes.
Right.
I have a YouTube channel, and on that YouTube channel, people see, okay, you have 300-400 videos. That's great. You're only doing one video a week. I get complaints, and it's like, yeah, you're not seeing the hours it takes to put that video, right? So when I make those, exactly, like a podcast,
it goes way more time than you ever expect to do anything like video or audio. Yeah.
So when you see that time, right, you're building it up. When you see that consistency, when you're doing it for years, you're seeing the growth. Even if it's small, you're seeing growth. Those are all little wins. And so I think as long as, I trust in myself, I trust in, I have a very good support structure, now with my family. I have really good leaders above me that I can lean on, that, I think that's really important, to be able to bounce ideas, to say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. Do you agree? And I think, it's kind of one of those things that for me, I know my work ethic, and I truly believe that I will outwork anybody around me or anybody in front of me. And the big reason for that is just because I'm a competitive person. I think that's vital. And so for me, at the end of the day, if I make a bad decision, I have to own that, but I'll come back from it and I'll become better. I'll learn from it and I'll grow, hopefully.
Right. Was the work ethic always there? Was that something you built through the military? Or was
No,
that just kind of inherent to your personality, you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. Kind of a mixture of both. So, like, ever since I was a kid, I've always outworked everybody in sports, but that really wasn't like where it came from. That helped me for sure. That tremendously helped me because I was a successful athlete, and so those things helped me. But then when I got in the military, it wasn't the military itself that did it, but they teach hard work for sure. But it was like my competitive drive. So when I deployed, there's what's called challenge coins in the military, which is SANS does challenge coins, right?
Yep.
So you give them for different classes and things for winning the CTF. In the military, if you do something good, someone hopefully of high rank will come and coin you. And then when all the guys are out, whoever has the highest coin doesn't have to buy the drinks, right? So if you have the highest ranked coin, that means you probably did the coolest thing, ideally. And I remember we went through our first deployment, and I just refused. This sounds kind of silly, and this is a kind of a young kid's mentality at the time, but I was one of those people that we weren't in like grave danger or anything like that when we were in the Middle East, but I would never have lived with myself if I was the reason something happened. So
Right.
for me, it was never a choice. It was like, I have to work harder than everybody because I couldn't live with myself if that happened.
Yeah.
So not everybody had that mentality, but when we got done with the deployment, when we were getting ready to come home, the director of A6, which is just basically communications for the Air Force, he showed up and he said he went to all the AORs, which is area of operations. He said he asked every single person who the hardest worker there was, and everybody said my name.
Nice.
And so, like, for me, like, once you kind of asked about that confidence, once I started seeing things like that, it kind of became like my personality, if you will. Like, I was like, okay, I outworked everybody
The
here.
bar was set, and you got to keep going
and
to
it's
it,
like,
right?
I can either stop, right, or I can work harder and be further than the next person. And so for me, that's kind of where, like, stacking those little wins really helped me build that confidence. And then, like I said, I'm very confident, but I also understand I make mistakes. I've failed plenty of times, and that helps too, in my opinion, because you can take those failures and, an example of a failure, I applied to be a SANS instructor multiple times. Never heard back, right? It doesn't mean I'm going to stop. It means I'm going to try and get more experience, try again, right? So like, those are examples of, like, I've failed multiple times in my career, and I actually consider doing a whole YouTube video on all my failures just to show that, like, it's normal to fail. It's how do you respond to that failure?
Right.
And so while I'm confident in my abilities, I also understand that mistakes happen, failures happen. And the biggest thing for me that makes me okay with that is the fact that I know I'll own it and I'll come back from it and hopefully be better for it.
Yeah, there's a lot of maturity in that mindset, right? A lot of people are very scared to do things because they're scared they're going to fail, and they don't try and, like, reach for large things, right? And that's one thing I can absolutely identify with. It's like, certainly there's been plenty of scary things along the way getting to what I've done, and every single time I've been like, you know what? I just got to try this, right?
Exactly.
Like, what's really the worst that could happen? And every time, right, it's been something that I've been happy that I did. And it's just taking those bold moves often is a lot of times the difference between a life-changing change of career or whatever it is, and keeping things static. I was listening to a podcast recently, Founders Podcast. I don't know if you ever listened to it, but one of the discussion points was on making mistakes, right? And the point being, if you're not making mistakes, you're probably not trying hard enough. You're not going risky enough. You're not going to grow, right? I wish I remember who the quote was, but they're basically like, I don't want to hire anyone that doesn't make any mistakes, because that means you are not taking enough risk. And we're not going to build anything here. So that's a mindset that I certainly try to embrace as well.
I think that's a really good point too, is like, think about, I mean, even, and this kind of can probably relate to anybody listening to this, but think about yourself in that aspect too. Like, think of anytime, a good example in the military that makes it very easy to like compare to is rank structures. So anytime you want a promotion in the military, there's certain requirements, right? They're very laid out, they're very clear cut. And you still see it all the time in the military. You'll see people that have had enough time where they could get promoted, but they haven't taken that one course they needed or whatever. And you're like, dude, you could have been promoted 2 years ago. What are you waiting on?
Right.
Well, I haven't taken that course. How come? Oh, I've just got too much stuff. I've got to, and it's because it's hard, right? And so I think exactly what you said is kind of like what's led you to where you are is when those opportunities come up, you dive into them. And even though they're scary, even though I'm sure, you know, we've all failed at times, like I think the more you do that, the more you, I call it be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But like the more you put yourself in uncomfortable positions, that's the best place to grow.
Absolutely.
And so for me, that's what I really kind of what's led me to where I am in general is when I see a really hard or uncomfortable position. Heck, even doing this podcast, I was like kind of like, you know, I'm not prepared. I don't know, but I'm like, it's an opportunity. Like, let's dive into it. Let's see what happens. And so like
part of me was thinking about that when I asked you. I'm like, let's see if he takes the bait, right? And if he'll go for it right away without any preparation, just on the spot, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm glad you did.
And I think like what's like you know, you do this battle in your head, right? It's like, what's gonna happen? Like, okay, let's say it gets released. Let's say you even say it had the biggest views in the world, millions, and I looked like an idiot. Who cares? Like, at least I tried, right?
Yeah.
I would rather try than sit there all day and go, man, if I would have done that, right?
Yeah,
I could have.
Have the regret of not having tried, right?
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think that's one of the things that almost drives me to, or as well, like you said, is I think it's a little bit of fear of like, you know, you only have finite amount of time. If you don't use it, like, I don't want to look back 20 years and go, man, if only I gave it more effort, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to be able to look back and say, I did everything I could. I maybe didn't get where I wanted, but I did everything I could at least, right?
Yeah, didn't leave any gas in the tank,
Yeah.
right? Something you said way back at the beginning I wanted to ask about at some point. You had mentioned learning to be calm under pressure, right, was part of your success. How is that something that is taught? Can people learn that? Was that something the military kind of instilled in you in some particular way, or was that just purely through experience and doing it?
Yeah, I think it can definitely be taught. The reason I say that, so that's a tough question. It's a kind of a loaded question, but in a good way, is it can definitely be taught, first off. But there's also some people that just don't have that capability, and that's okay. It's okay. Maybe just running a SOC is not for you. You can still be a leader, a great leader, but you may just not want to run a stressful environment like that. And so it can definitely be taught because that's what basic training basically is, right? They throw you in this environment that you can't win, you'll never win, right? They design it so you can't win. And they purposely play these games where they say, you know, do this, and it's an impossible task. Whether you do it 100% right or the best they've ever seen, you're gonna fail. So then, but you have to lead through that, right? And so, it's an interesting psychological experiment that they're really doing in a sense, because you know you can't win, but you're still giving everything you have, thinking that you might win, right? And so it's interesting, but that was my first dose of it, and I realized I stood out in that environment, and I stood out because I was able to keep a cool head and calm, and I think sports helped me with that a lot too, right? Like, you know, when the game's on the line, that type of thing. Then, you know, overseas definitely added to it. But I think it's part of it was, like I was saying earlier, is I was like injecting myself in those positions. So like nobody asked me to go to the military, right? I signed up. Then once I got back, like I didn't have to go on that deployment. They asked if I wanted to because they had enough people. I injected myself in that, right? And then once I got there, like I was low enough rank, I didn't have to lead that team, but they were like, can you do this? Yes. Like, so I was injecting myself in those positions, which really, the more and more and more you get put in them, the easier it becomes. And it just kind of starts to become, you kind of go into like a mode, if you will. Like for me, I have, and some of my family kind of talk about it, but like I have like me, and then I have like work me. Like there's like, I'm cool, I'm fun, I'm whatever. And then when I'm working, like I'm serious, like it's go time and I can operate at a different level. And so like for me, I think that was learning that about myself early helped a lot. I think everybody given enough, push into that scenario could do it. I think the hardest part is, can it be trained? Yes. How do you train it, right? Because not everybody wants to be thrown into those environments. So if you come to me and say, hey, I want to learn how to do this, and I start yelling at you and making you do tests and stuff, and then you're like, I don't like this. It's like, well, how do I train you without putting you in that environment, right? How do I... And I think being in a SOC long enough, certain people start doing that as well. I think it's just repetition. So can it be trained? Sure. Simulating it is hard because if you don't truly believe there's consequences, in my opinion, you're going to respond differently, even if you don't mean to. So I think that's the hardest part about training it, is how do you do that from a not just, good standpoint, but also an ethical, moral, and comfortable standpoint. Like you don't want to torture someone just to show that you can train them,
Yeah. One thing that hits a lot of people in InfoSec and may particularly strike people who have some interest in leadership but have not been there yet is imposter syndrome. And it's right back to confidence, right, which we already kind of mentioned. But a different take on that, a couple times you've mentioned there's like things that you noticed, right? Feedback about things you've done where it was a hint and like a boost of, I might be onto something here, right? Where you said, your family kind of like knows you have this other personality. People have told you you were the hardest worker, right? And those kind of things. Those I always look for in various situations as like signals that there's something going on.
Yeah.
Even if a lot of you is resistant, you're like, I'm not the person, that can't be me. I also think like if you're trying to be objective, you have to say, if I really was ready for this, like what would I see, right? And if you're seeing those kind of things, that's your clue, right? That maybe you're wrong.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on imposter syndrome, or like, is that something you ever struggle with?
Yeah,
and,
that's
any kind
that's
of
an
experience
awesome
like that?
question. I actually love that question because it's funny. Not really, nobody knows this about me, but everybody, in my opinion, if you're good at anything, you've had imposter syndrome in some capacity because you're standing out amongst common things. So you are the outlier. So you have to ask yourself why. And a lot of times people say that, like, is it because I'm different? Is it because
did I accidentally fall into that?
Am I just
That's
am I lucky? Did I get here on accident? Right? And I think exactly what you said, those outliers, those things that happen, this is actually something I struggled with, not necessarily struggled with. It's something that took me a long time to mature my mind, in the sense of I would get that feeling of imposter syndrome, and I still do at times. And as soon as I started to feel it, it would like, I don't remember what the odd percentage is, but there's an odd percentage of people that like don't talk to themselves in their head,
I've heard of that,
And I don't know if that's true or not, but I've heard that.
I don't know, I definitely talk to myself all the time.
I talk to myself in my head. So like every time I'd start to, and I listen to David Goggins a lot, and Jocko Willink, and military people are are leaders and stuff. And they kind of talk about that battle in your head, and they like actually fight themselves in their head in a sense. And that's what I started doing. I started saying, like, I need to change my mentality. Like, if I'm not saying you shouldn't be aware of mistakes or downfalls or things like that, I'm definitely aware of them. But when I start to hear myself in my head say those things, right? I do exactly what you said you look for in other things. I look for other indicators. I say, like, that's true, but there's a reason I'm here. And the reason is, look at this good example, right? This good example. So I think it's having the mental self-awareness of saying, okay, maybe I'm different. Maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm where I need to be, whatever. But there's a reason I'm here, whether that's good or bad, right? If I'm at the bottom, there's probably a reason. If I'm at the top, there's probably a reason. And being mentally aware enough to have that conversation with yourself, and I think that's where that really changed for me, the imposter syndrome, because that and just experience over time, you start to realize, like, some of these giants in the field, right? While they may be geniuses, you could probably go ask them one question that they wouldn't know, right? That you might know.
Yeah.
And it's like you realize that nobody knows everything.
Right.
Nobody's a perfect IT professional. No SOC analyst can answer every incident. You know what I mean? So you start to realize like the reason you're in this position is because of your skill set. Nobody can match your exact skill set. That's the whole reason that you're there. So I think that helped me a lot, is like being able to sit with myself. I don't actually meditate, but like that's kind of, I get up at 4 a.m. and I have like alone time.
Yeah.
And like I sit with myself and think about that, like, just no noise, just me, and like think about those constant things of like, those constant mental battles.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people that are more honest with themselves, including myself, like I can still be more honest with myself. I think that helps because you start to take an outside look and identify your flaws and realize, yeah, we all have flaws, right? But like you said, identify those good spots too. I think a lot of people really struggle with giving themselves a pat on the back, right? When they do something good, they're like, yeah, that was good, but this guy did that. They're comparing themselves. And I think if you stop doing that, if you start going, take out the but, right? Hey, I did something good. That's it. You did something good. Be proud of that moment.
Right.
And one thing that really stuck with me, I went to a different training years ago, and I was taking a cert, and I was still pretty young in my career. And the guy came to me and he said, this was right before I took it. He said, after you pass this cert, I want you to come out of here and I want you to celebrate for a week. And I was like, that's a bit dramatic, like, what are you talking about? And he said, just trust me, just do it. I said, okay. So I passed that cert and I went with my friends and we just celebrated like we just won the lottery. And I was like, I'm just doing this really to be kind of goofy, but like, that moment still sticks with me, where that lesson of like, he was saying it's okay to celebrate your wins and it's okay to be happy that you're doing something, and you don't need to kind of like suppress it because it makes other people feel like you're being cocky or arrogant or anything. Mm-hmm. It's okay to be happy with yourself and be okay with like what you've accomplished, and that always stuck with me.
Yeah, especially when it comes to doing really complex work, like a lot of the stuff we do is, right? Like that's no joke, right?
Yeah.
That is serious effort that it takes to train for really any certification, right?
Yeah.
In this field or anything in the military, undoubtedly difficult on pretty much any scale that's out there. To the comparison thing and some of that, one of the quotes that stuck with me that I heard a long time ago, I think it was on Lewis Howe's podcast on School of Greatness. He said, like, the definition of greatness is doing something the former you would have thought to be impossible.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
That's
in
awesome.
other words, the only thing you should be comparing yourself to is your former self, right? And if your trajectory is going up, right, like that's all you got to care about. You got to look at other people. Everyone's on their own track, right?
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Matthew McConaughey kind of said the similar thing. He said someone came to him and asked, who's your role model or who's your hero? Mm-hmm. And he said, it's me in 5 years. And then he said, and then 5 years later, someone asked him and they said, are you your hero? He said, no, my hero's me in 5 years. And so he said, I'll never beat him. That's the point. Like, I'm going to forever improve, right?
Right.
And so I think that's an awesome way to look at things, because like you said, if you are in a position where 5 years ago you'd have went, you're nuts. Yeah. That's an awesome position to be in. And so you should be proud of that and keep striving to be better.
Yeah, for sure. What you mentioned Matthew McConaughey a couple times. Was that stuff all from the Green Lights book?
No, I actually have listened to a few of his talks. He did a commencement speech and some other things like that. But
it sounded vaguely familiar, and I was like, I think I've heard that, but I haven't read that book yet. It's on my list, but I haven't checked it out.
I haven't read his book yet either. But I really do like Matthew McConaughey as not just an actor, but also just the way he talks about things. He doesn't seem to care what other people think in like a good way, and so I kind of like people like that, where they do their own thing and they're successful at it because they're doing their own thing and they're separating themselves that way. I like that.
Yeah. Some of the other people you mentioned, right? Jocko, Goggins, that aligns very obviously with the military experience. Other people might look at them and be like, whoa, that's not me, right?
Yeah.
Any other places you've gathered inspiration from that you find particularly helpful, that, favorite books or other kind of things that keep you going?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I like a lot of different books from a leadership perspective. Jocko, in my opinion, emphasizes my leadership style the best. That's why I lean on him. But one thing I like you mentioned, and I'm not trying to go off course here, but one thing you said about Goggins is, like you said, like people look at that and they go, "That's not me," right? And I agree. I understand.
He's a particular brand of persistent.
Yeah,
that
and I
most
definitely
people...
understand, right? And
Yeah.
but I think there's things you can take from him, and this is what I do. Like because I don't have any aspirations to run 200 miles tomorrow or any of that stuff.
Yeah.
But one thing I think that, like you said, is that's not me, is so many people look at that as in that same light, and I think the reality is that can be you in your field, right? I think the reality is, you might not want to go run all those miles or do that thing, but those persistent leaders, regardless of who they are. I'm a big history person, and I'm from Illinois, so like I've read Abraham Lincoln, and I like love history about him. And so like all these leaders, they all have the same thing in common, right? They overcame these massive things. Like Abraham Lincoln couldn't read, right? He taught himself how to read in a log cabin staring at a book, which now seems insane. I don't even know how you could do that. But like that's an example of like all of them have the same thing in common. They just don't quit, right? And I think that's one of the best things is like, if you're not where you want to be, just don't quit. And maybe you won't get there as fast as you want, if maybe you won't be the perfect person or anything like that. But I think if you are persistent in what you actually aspire to be in, I think that alone will take you to where you want to be. And I think that's one thing I like about Goggins and them is that if you translate it to whatever you're trying to do, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be running or lifting or any of that. I think it still applies in my personal opinion. And so that's one of the reasons I like their leadership, is because they pretty much are saying, put it in your hands and make it happen. And in my opinion, honestly, it is that simple at times. It's obviously much more complex.
Not easy, but simple, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's actually really good. I've never heard anyone say it that way, and that's a perfect way of saying it. It's not easy, but it's simple, right?
Yeah.
And so I think one of the things I liked specifically about Goggins, like you said, is, he couldn't read. Most people don't know that. And so he had to sit there. He read at such a low level, he couldn't get in the military. So he had to sit there and teach himself how to read books more and more and more. And he could read, at a very low level, but he had to teach himself. And like, that's an example, like that was way before he was who he is now, right? Like, and so like he saw an obstacle and he overcame that. And I think that's everybody in every field ever. And I think that's one of the biggest things to take from those type of leaders is you don't need to be breaking world records tomorrow or anything like that, but you can still be persistent and overcome those obstacles.
Yeah, I love that. A lot of people do look at those folks and they're like, oh my God, right? I'm not going to run until my legs break. This man is completely insane. But it's not about running until your legs break. It's where can you kind of tangentially pick up the same mindset, right? Which is like, no one wants to do that. No one can do that. But look what you can do if you really put your mind to it and you put, the effort into it. And you brought that up earlier, right? It's just like consistency and being almost stubborn and trying to get something done, right? Effort can often overtake talent and other kind of circumstances a lot of the time, just pushing through and being absolutely persistent about it.
Exactly. And you mentioned, that where does some of this some of that confidence get built up? And I'm a big proponent of that. I think exercise is a big part of that because you see progress, right? Regardless.
And it's hard the whole time.
Exactly. It's never easy, right? One of the things that, one of my favorite quotes by Will Smith actually is, he says, if we get on a treadmill together, he says, two things are going to happen. Either one, you're going to get off before I do, or he says, two, I'm going to die on that treadmill, right? And I think that's it sounds so silly, but like that's really, you can apply that to anything. And if you really want it and you really put your mind to it, you can do that. And I think that's where exercise helps build that confidence for myself anyway. Like I notice when I'm not exercising, I'm in a much worse place mentally.
Oh yeah, me
And
too.
so exercising really helps me. And I know it's not for everybody, but I do recommend, like, especially SOC analysts and people in SOC operations. It's so easy to sit behind that desk all day, go home, watch TV. And it is so hard to be in a good mental state at that point when you're doing that. And so that's something I see, like, when you go find, typically, I'll say typically, not always, but when you find a SOC analyst that's like working out and taking care of themselves, and you usually find a happier person.
Yeah.
And so that's something where, like, I'm a big proponent for not like saying, hey, go work out, but like maybe having your company pay for gym memberships and stuff, like trying to encourage people to get out of there. I'm a big proponent for, like, every Friday, you know, if you can, go outside, or, you know, just keep them active and keep them out of that like closed off space that most
off
SOCs
IT position.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's reams and reams of research that shows the very positive, very clear benefits of exercise, both mentally and obviously physically, but like mentally as well. I know everyone that I've ever talked to about exercise is constantly like, hey, I'm getting my best ideas, right, when I'm running around. I was excited to see you doing a walk and talk podcast, how that goes, right? Like walking around, getting some blood flow. So yeah, always a good thing to consider. Back to the SOC specifically, how do you find yourself applying these things day to day? Is there something that you're bringing in, like this consistency, and like find yourself running into walls but having to push through it? Like what are the situations where all of these skills and built up qualities you have are being applied in a security operations environment?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, and also something that I think most leaders in a SOC probably struggle with. And one of the things I do is, to start with, you ask, like, how do I stay consistent and do that? One of the things I do is I intentionally do certain things. Like, I get to work an hour before my entire team. That's not because I'm like, oh, look, I'm here before you. It's because a lot of times when the SOC's operating, it's really hard for me to focus on things. So I'm there an hour early to kind of prep myself. Okay, here's what I need to knock out for the day. Here's my plans. Here's my goals, all that stuff. So I prep myself in a way that, like, allows me to be successful, even if it's gets chaotic or something pops up. Like, I have it pre-planned of what I need to get done that day. So that's one thing, is staying organized is a big thing for me.
Yep.
And then another big one is, like I said, I get up really early in the morning, and I try to keep up on what are other SOCs doing, what are, you know, SANS courses, all this type of different stuff. And I try to make sure I can apply these ideas in some capacity. Like, a good example is, if we can't create an entire workflow to automate something, right? It doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. Let's focus on, let's create the first step today, right? And then tomorrow we'll come back and we'll do the next step, and et cetera. And so I think that's one of the things that keeps me consistently, myself and my analysts, consistently improving, is that's kind of our mindset, is like, awesome, we knocked this out today. Let's kind of give ourselves a pat on the back, and, like, what are we going to do tomorrow? Like, let's keep that momentum, keep improving. We actually have had, like, weeks where, like, a week will go by and everyone, like, at the end of the week was like, holy cow, that was awesome. We just did, look at how much we improved. Like, we just knocked all this out. And, like, it might be an automation we completed, you know, something like that made it simpler. And so, like, I think it's got to come top down, in my opinion. It's got to come from leaders. But there's a difference between, like, just, in my opinion, just pushing and saying, like, you have to keep improving. It's not kind of like your quarterly earnings, like, you have to keep getting more money. Like, there's a difference between that and, like, finding what improvements you can add that also improve their life. I think that helps, if you can tie it back to, hey, if we do this, right, you're going to get less alerts. So your job's going to get easier, right? So if we all kind of just focus up right now, tomorrow will be easier, right? So I think that's helped with the buy-in, but it also helps consistency, is when you start seeing progress. If you make sure you have, like, small measurable goals, I think that helps drive progress and consistency. Whereas if you just look at it as a whole and say, hey, we have this project that's going to take 6 months, and start, right? It gets hard a month in to be like, yeah, I'm still working on this stupid project, you know? But if you have those, like, successes over and over, kind of building that confidence, like we said.
Yep.
I think that's kind of what keeps me consistent and what keeps me going. And I think, again, that comes, like you said, all the way back to the military. Make your bed in the morning. Like, those little wins really add up. And I'm sure there's some studies out there. I haven't done them, but I'm sure there's a study of something that shows that, like, those successes in your head make you more motivated and things like that. So for me, that's kind of how I do it. Not everybody's, mentality is the same way, but like for me, that's what works. And I try to tailor that to individual analysts in a way that makes sense to them and helps them drive that progress.
Awesome. Final question. For fast advice for people who are thinking about becoming a SOC analyst, what would you tell them to get them into that next step and get them to take the leap and try it out?
Yeah, so first thing I always tell anybody trying to do anything is just try. That's the first thing. And I say that because I run a Discord as well, and there's about 3,000 people in there. And I can't tell you how many, I bet I have thousands of them that have been in there for years. And every week they'll be asking me, hey, how do you do this? How do you get ready to be an analyst? And it's like, you've been in here for years asking the same questions because you don't want to take that leap, right? Uh-huh. So the biggest thing is take the leap. Take whatever step you need to get moving into that direction and try it. The other thing I'll say is make sure it's something that you think about, research, and enjoy. Mm-hmm. Because that, in my opinion, is what leads to a lot of burnout. Is people think they want to be a SOC analyst because they're like, oh, I saw it on TV, it's an awesome job. They kind of do some fun stuff on the computer, and they actually have no idea what they're getting into. I think if you know what the expectations are when you're getting into one and have a little bit of an understanding, it's not so much of a culture shock when you get in there, because I've had analysts that are like, they start, and there's an incident day one, and they're like, oh my God, what did I do, right? And so you want to understand what you're getting into. But I think the biggest thing is start. I think everybody can do it. It's not something that, there's this common misconception I see with a lot of people I talk to, especially in the military as well, because military has like this, essence about it, where people are like, oh, military, right? So like, there's like this thought of it's this grandiose thing that you can't achieve. And I think the reality is that if you actually put yourself in that position and just start, you'll find out that you can get there a lot easier than you think. And I think if you actually do the research, do the preparation, when you show up, you know what to expect. It's so much simpler to just hit the ground running and get going with your job. So in my opinion, that's the best advice I can give you is whatever you're thinking about doing tomorrow, do it tomorrow. Don't wait a week or a month, or, don't study. The best time to do it is today.
Yeah. Awesome. So take the leap, take the fearless action, right?
Yeah.
Dive in, but know what you're looking at.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do your research first, but then you got to just have the bravery to do it, right?
Yeah, that's the biggest thing.
Awesome. I think we can wrap it up there. Thank you so much for chatting with me. I had a great time. I think we went in a different and deeper direction than I normally do.
Yeah,
so it's going to be an awesome podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks, John.
Yeah, thank you. So what did you think? Hopefully you found that conversation as interesting and energizing as I did. What were the themes, though? For me, when I listened to it, here are some of the things that stuck out to me. Zak didn't necessarily set out to become a leader from the start, but through his actions and his circumstances, he kept finding himself in those positions. His natural drive and ambition then took over, and without even necessarily maybe consciously doing it, he found himself in leadership position after leadership position. Every time he got some momentum going and hit a wall, he was able to find a way over or around it, constantly pushing forward and making progress towards his goals. And that's the big theme and takeaway I got from this that I mentioned in the first part of the show. Zak's persistence seems to be his key to success. It's his can-do attitude, his drive to succeed. Both of those things make him highly effective, and it's a pattern that shows up again and again as the magical formula for success, and in Zak's case was a ticket into a chain of important and increasingly fun leadership roles. Another thing that stuck out to me that I wanted to point out, Zak was very open about where he felt like he made mistakes. That can be a hard thing to do as a leader, and especially publicly. But on the other side of that admission is growth. No one gets it right the first time, and Zak's ability to continually reflect on his approach and correct course to a style that matches his team and the individuals on it is the mark of a great leader. and no doubt another major ingredient in his success. To close up the episode, here are some things I was left thinking about after this conversation, and hopefully questions that can help you reflect as well. First, are there any roadblocks or bottlenecks that are holding you back right now? I'm sure there are, everyone has some. What if you refuse to accept those roadblocks as the way things are and instead started with the premise, there is a way around this, and I just need to brainstorm some options, pick one, and then act it out? Where might that take you? Taking agency in problem solving can be intimidating in some situations, but it's also a powerful thing and is often the difference between being highly effective or feeling stuck. Reframing that problem as solvable and forcing your way to think through options might be the key that unlocks a sticky issue for you. So I think it's something that's worth doing. Second, think about your own actions at work and your team culture. Do you work on a team with openness and trust that can and does admit their mistakes so that they can grow from them? If not, why not? If so, how did you build that culture, and what are the habits that your team is enacting to make sure it stays that way? Team values are an important thing to consider. If they aren't clear to you, your team, or your management, you may quickly find yourselves unaligned and acting in ways that are detrimental to the group. If you haven't considered what rules your team is explicitly or implicitly following, it might be worth writing them down and having a discussion about them to make sure everyone stays on the same path. Just some food for thought. And with that, we're at the end. Thanks again for listening. I hope you enjoyed the walk and talk style of this episode. It was a lot of fun, and I think a format I might try again in the future. If you have any thoughts on that format, if the noise was distracting, if you didn't like it, or if you loved it, feel free to let me know in the podcast feedback link in the show description. Just know that doesn't tell me who wrote those comments, so if you want to hear anything back from me, you're going to have to include some contact info in your comment. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Blueprint.